right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Dina. I am the head pain coach and chief curator at Pain to Possibilities and the Change Pain Academy. And I'm also the lucky gal who gets to host this Willow Tree Summit on chronic pain and trauma. Today, I get to introduce you to our esteemed guest, Nichole Myles. Nichole is bringing forward more than 20 years of experience in education, nonprofits, and leadership. Nichole weaves together compelling storytelling, I love, with experience and expertise to engage listeners in a journey of self-discovery, the ups and downs of growth, and what it really takes to come back from trauma. Nichole's specialties in trauma-informed practices, resilience, and post-traumatic growth aren't just rooted in her expertise. As a domestic abuse survivor who lost everything, lived in hiding, and had to rebuild an entire life, all while raising 3 children, she's lived it. Wow. Nichole has a master's degree in psychology with a coaching and consulting concentration and 2 levels of professional certification in trauma and resilience. She also carries a CAGS in nonprofit management and a CFRE, which is Certified Fundraising Executive Designation, and a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Certificate. Nichole's specialty is creating easily accessible frameworks, methods, and tools that help turn trauma into transformation. She uses her education to hone in poignant personal stories into opportunities for participants to glean critical steps for their own growth, examine why they've overcome, and learn to lean into that experience to amplify their futures. Nichole has been a featured speaker and workshop facilitator for many organizations, including the National Conference on Crimes Against Women, the National Coalition on Domestic Violence, LEAD UMC, and the She Is Me International Summit. And her TED Talk, Lessons I've Learned from the People Who Don't Like Me, has been viewed more than 80,000 times. Nichole works as an expert companion in the position of speaker, facilitator, consultant, or coach, helping move clients from survivorship to thrivership. Nichole, you are the woman for the job today. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to join you for the summit. This is a great idea, and I'm so excited to be able to share information with your attendees. This is wonderful.
You're awesome. It is a big topic. Today, we are going to be talking about a topic I adore, is post-traumatic growth. And the reason why it's so important, actually, we'll get into it, but I think what's most important is if you can tell our listeners, we kind of got a snippet of it in the bio, but how did you get to where you are now?
Sure. So it's really a great question. I, like so many of us, life happened to me, right? I thought I knew who I was and where I was headed, and life threw this big hard left turn at me, which was that I found myself in this abusive marriage. And like so many people, I did the thing where I was protecting what was going on. And I think whether that is a sickness and a chronic illness for yourself or an abusive relationship, we get very protective of not wanting to share what is really happening on the inside of us, what's really happening behind closed doors. And it became very dramatic, very amplified. And I did end up having to go into hiding. I was 8 months pregnant at the time.
Oh.
And it was pretty dramatic. We then lived in hiding for a period of about 14 or 16 months. And at the end of that really trying and excruciating process in many ways, suddenly it was me and these children and a new life and a new community and even a new name. And I couldn't go back to the career I had. And so I had to rebuild, and I spent, the better part of a decade really kind of trying to reclaim a place I had been. And at some point along the way learned what I think probably a lot of your summit attendees hopefully learned sooner. And if not, I can share the wisdom today that that's not how it works.
Right.
You can't go back to what was. You have to reestablish a new normal.
Oh, yes.
And when I started doing that, I started to make all of these other discoveries along the way. And I would reveal a little bit of my story along the way.
Yeah.
And people would say, oh, you should tell the story. And I'd say, I can't. I'm not. It wasn't a shame thing. It was that I was afraid of having people gauge their own pain against mine and decide whether or not they were going to deal with it or dismiss it based on where it stacked up against mine. And that wasn't acceptable to me.
Right.
And so during COVID, like so many of us, I was doing a lot of reading. I was a nonprofit executive, and I was trying to kind of hold this organization together with two hands and duct tape, and finding all of the all of the information I could. And I stumbled upon this brilliant article by a man named Dr. Richard Tedeschi, who I hope I say his name correctly, but he and Dr. Robert Levine are the founders of something called post-traumatic growth, which is in fact, an established psychology. It's a branch out of positive psychology. It's been around for 30 years, and I'd never heard of it. And I couldn't believe, in this sort of stumbling and rebuilding of my life and in all of the things that had happened, that along the way, no one had said, hey, there's this thing that can happen where you can project and propel after trauma, which is what I had done, but in a very messy kind of falling down and getting up way without any guidance. And I just, I fell in love. It's like, this is what I need to be doing. I need to be telling this. This is how my story makes sense.
Right.
Now I can say I understand that these are profound events that change people's lives, and we should be sharing them, but I needed it to be within context of how I could help.
Right.
And so I made a study of it. I did complete a master's degree. I reached out to Dr. Tedeschi. I built myself a framework, and here I am. And this is what I'm doing now to really make sure that other folks who go through any kind of a trauma understand that, we don't want traumas to happen to us, but it is basically, part of the human experience. If you're going to play the game, you're probably going to have this. But there are tools and frameworks and ways to grow from it, and you don't have to get stuck.
Right. That's why this conversation is so important, because it's really important for our listeners to understand that there is an opportunity to move forward. There's there's possibilities, and there's growth. I mean, how many people are stuck in the muck right now, feeling like that's an impossible, we'll get into that for sure. But that's why I'm so excited to have you on board. Nichole, how would you describe to our listeners, in a nutshell, kind of what post-traumatic growth is or looks like?
So post-traumatic growth really is a series of changes in your state of mind and being that positively impact as a result of your trauma. So it's something that you've learned along the way. And what actually happens to people who engage in post-traumatic growth is they grow deeper in their personal relationships. They often grow deeper in their spirituality. They grow deeper in the meaning of their work, should they choose to have it. They go deeper in the meaning of what their impact really is in the world. And they go deeper within themselves, which is so exciting and wonderful, because if you are stuck in that muck, if you are stuck in that space, I describe it as everything feels kind of gray, right? It's some shade of gray or darker. And when you engage in this post-traumatic growth piece, it's not that there's not still dark in there. There is. Trauma is real and it's painful, but you get these bright whites and lights and colors on the other side of it. You get a spectrum back that is often more vivid than what you actually had before the trauma. I think that's what's so wonderful about this study.
Right. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I think it's an important message for people to hear. We're all about hope here, right? And this is one of the hope messages, that there is another side to it. There is a space on the other side of the bridge, right? There is work to be done. Now, speaking of that work, just to kind of give our listeners a little bit of a high level perspective, if we're looking down from a bird's eye view, what would the work entail around post-traumatic growth?
So I did a 5-step framework for folks, because I am really big on tools. This is a thing that I think we also, in this space, especially in this trauma space, we spend a lot of time talking about the trauma and the story of the trauma, and not enough time talking about how do you move from, I was traumatized and now I'm not living in my trauma anymore. Okay, well, what did that look like?
Absolutely.
So in my space, I work on what I call education, loss and limitation, strength, narration, and impact. And what that really is in education, we look at the conditions of what actually happened to us. It's the one time in our journey where we take ourselves out of what happened and just look at the scenario. You know, does your disease exist without you? Well, of course it does. You didn't have anything to do with that. The manifestation of that disease. Does your abuser still exist as an abuser without you? Of course they do. So we take some time to really isolate what happened in education. In loss and limitations, we do something that I think is frequently overlooked, especially in Western cultures. You know, we don't like grief. We don't like discomfort. We don't like sadness. We're very big into the toxic positivity, pink clouding thing. And it's really a disservice. And it's one of the ways that we get held back, I have found, as trauma survivors is, you know, there are days, I have been so blessed in my work life that I have always had an advocation. Means that before my abusive situation, I had an advocation and I loved it. I loved my work. I was an educator. I was a music educator and I was a musician, and I loved that work. And there are days when I miss that work. There are still days when I miss that work. And so in loss and limitation, we take a moment to say, we did lose things, right? Whether you lost a part of your mobility or you lost a part of your job or your identity, there was a loss there. I have a little ritual that I take folks through about how to honor that loss, how to grieve it properly, and then how to release it. We release it into the world so that now it can come back. Yes, there's a little bit of grief and some nostalgia, but it doesn't come back in a way that derails us anymore.
Yep, well said.
And then we get to do strengths. So we get to do some exercises around identifying our strengths. And you mentioned my TEDx talk, which was lessons I've learned from the people who don't like me. And it had a lot to do with the kind of labels we put on ourselves. Many of which are actually the labels we need to recover from our trauma, but often they've been cast in kind of this negative light. It's very true, especially for the women and women identifying folks in our group. You know, the things like tenacity, not considered feminine. But let me just tell you, if you're going to get through a trauma, tenacity is a great skill to have. Or also those downplayed skills, right? Like sensitivity. Sensitivity is an amazing gift. If you have it, but if it's always been cast to you as this kind of negative thing. So we work on really collecting what our strengths are. What we possess inside of us that's really unique, which is also why the framework that I build as a framework is because I can't say to you, well, these are the skills that do this. I suppose I could. We see people publish books like this all the time, right? But I don't believe in that. I believe that you know inside yourself. And so I help unearth that. And then in narration, we actually take those first three pieces and we say, this was the scenario. And these were the losses. But here's who I am and what I gained coming out of it. I have come to interpret narration very widely because I am very dedicated to the expressive arts, part of the tools that I use. So narration absolutely can be journal writing, storytelling, and crafting, which I love, but it can also be painting yourself into a new world. It can be, you know, just talking through things. Narration is the new story that's going to play in your head. We want to replace this. And there's great neurobiology for this to actually say that we can help rewire our brains when we do this.
Yes.
We work hard on that narration piece so that we can do the last step, which is impact. And in the Tedeschi and Levine work, who I love and adore and respect so much, I think they did, however, make an accidental, I call this accidental misogyny sometime. Women they call it service. Okay. Now I come out of the nonprofit world, and out of the education world. So there's a pre-programming there that service may often equal martyrdom. Oh, okay. And also true for women, true for, you know, people who've given up everything to take care of their families. So I don't prefer that word service simply because if it's not building you up, if it's not that thriving for you, it can definitely be service, but it wouldn't necessarily be good. And so I like the word impact.
Mm. Okay.
Impact says, what do I want to do
Yeah.
with this narration
Mhm.
to make the mark on the world I want to make?
Right.
And, that may be an interpersonal relationship. That may be the person in the neighborhood who knocks on the door and welcomes the new people. It may be starting your own new nonprofit, right? There's this massive spectrum
Yeah.
in impact that for me is a much more upward building, forward focused space
Mhm.
than the word service,
Yeah.
which is about me emptying myself out.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I don't,
Yeah.
right. I don't want trauma survivors doing that. I want them taking this in,
Yeah.
right? Taking in and feeling built up by it. So I use the word impact. So that's what my 5-step framework looks like. And I walk people through that in a lot of different ways, but it's
Right. Oh, amazing. I love a couple of things because there's lots of beautiful things to unpack there. And then I'm going to also try and tie it into the whole chronic pain thing to
yes.
weave them together. So I love your framework because I think we work well with frameworks. I think that just gives us a little bit of a guidepost. I love the word narration because I think it's really important for trauma, for chronic pain alike. When they come together, there's the words that they are hearing, the context that they live with, and how that impacts their lived experience. So unfortunately, in an uninformed society that we do live in when it comes to trauma and chronic pain, there's a lot of words that are quite damaging, causing more pain, triggering more of the deep emotions. So yes, so the narration is a really important part, and it gives them more of the power, it seems, when it's their voice, their narration. I love the fact that the post-traumatic growth is pulling them forward in a sense that they are giving back. And nothing like living with pain or chronic illness or even trauma to lose that sense of purpose and lose that sense of values, the lived experience and their values. So that seems to just pull it all together so nicely. What a beautiful little circle.
Well, I think, you've alluded to a couple of really important things. And one of them is the language that we use in general, but certainly around trauma, around illness, around all of this. Where I have my freebie download is a trauma informed language handout.
Perfect.
And it is because language matters so much, and it's such an insidious thing. It's something we don't engage with or think about on a regular basis because we are kind of this society of platitudes, right? We're this little, we like the little clips. We like I think about the West Wing because I'm a huge West Wing geek. There was a moment in which there was a candidate running for president, and he kept throwing out all these little quips, but he was getting all of the interpretations wrong. And they called him, they called them McNuggets, right? They were reaching for the McNuggets. And I was like, yes, like that's what happens, right? You get part of this, right?
Yes.
But it plays into this terrible narrative over time that can really take you apart. One of the most frequent ones that I hear personally, there are two. One is everything happens for a reason. So I think if you're a chronic pain person, this is also a really frequent one.
Yeah.
And you must be so grateful. You should just be grateful to be here. These are two that really, really play into, I think, the capacity, the mentality of what happens to us as people who end up in these trauma spaces, in these chronic pain pieces, And I wrote a piece about everything happening for a reason being such a non-trauma informed word because it steals your agency, right? If everything happens for a reason, if there was a Machiavellian higher power, insert your version of higher power here, that insisted that you get a chronic disease or insisted that I get married to an abuser, then that same Machiavellian higher power is now in control of whether or not I recover and how I do that.
Right. Oh, yes.
My agency has been taken away from me. I just don't believe that. So I say, look, I don't believe everything happens for a reason. I believe we make a reason out of what happens. That is post-traumatic growth. It is saying, I refuse to have this be the end of my story.
Oh, can we just pause on that one for a moment? Because
of course
people are going to hear this. I hope you hear this right now, that this is not the end story. You're right.
Okay. This is not the end. This
Yeah.
is not the end of your story. And refusing to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It means, and look, it means it's messy.
Yeah.
Right. It's messy. And I lay out this framework visually for people when I go and speak to groups, and it lays across this nice linear line. And then I show this thing above it. It's all colored. And then I show this thing above it. There's all these colors kind of mixing together, because the reality of the situation is that that's actually what this recovery is going to look like, right? There's no point in post-traumatic growth. You're like, well, now
Yes.
I alluded to it. I still have moments where I struggle with that loss and limitation piece.
Yep.
I have moments where my narrative has evolved over time, right? These things happen and you go forward and back in them. The important piece knowing is to know that it's not your end.
Right.
That's not your end.
That's powerful. I mean, if I could just pick up my microphone and just drop it, like that's the piece right there. I do think too that what's really important to realize just in this whole process of recovery or healing is that it is a process. It is if we can sort of come into it understanding that it is going to take time. There is no quick fix. We've been really groomed. I've been saying this a couple times throughout the summit. We've been really groomed to believe that there's a quick fix. We are human beings. We have a lifespan, and that lifespan is us pulling together the pieces and really growing into ourselves. And if we knew that up front, then we wouldn't have had this expectation of quick fixes, right?
Right. Well, and I think we think, because again, we are enculturated. Like, this is you're not flawed if you think this. So I think all of us have had this thought that there's a point at which we arrive. Right? We will arrive somewhere. And so until we've arrived, we're not where we're supposed to be. And we should be getting there faster, wherever your there is, than we are. And it's not that. When we start to look at other cultures and we look at the way other people approach life, it is that we are always on our journey.
Right.
And the goal is, my company is called Myles to Go Speaking and Consulting. And it's because just one of the things I say is that no matter where you're headed, keep going.
Right.
You're on your journey. You're on your journey. And today, your journey may be that you need to stay in bed and heal. Tomorrow, your journey may look different.
Right.
And you did not arrive the next day late. You didn't arrive late because you stayed in bed those 2 days. That was part of your journey.
That was taken care. Yeah.
Right. And so I think I wish that we could undo that, like as a society, that we could undo this notion that there's some specific destination and there's some specific timeline that you're supposed to get there on it. And nothing is right in your world until you do, because then you miss the spectrum, right? You miss
linear. It's never linear, but we've made it linear, haven't we?
Right. We've really tried to make the McNuggets, right? We really tried to make this bite-sized for people.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Right.
I do wish that it was. And you will have setbacks. It's something I didn't even put in the form. So I'm now going to surprise you as well. Yeah. After I did reestablish my life and came out of this violent situation, I got my first new job in a new field, and I was feeling like I was going to arrive, right? I was going to arrive. And 92 days, and I only know that because my health insurance kicked in 90 days. 92 days after that position, I actually contracted bacterial meningitis.
Oh.
And nearly died.
Oh, boy.
And had a couple of years of nerve damage and some things afterwards. And the number of times I kept thinking, this is how my story is going to end.
Oh.
I came through all of this other stuff.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to get this completely random, I met no risk factors for getting this disease at 35 years old. It was just like, there was nothing, which is another thing about trauma. Trauma does affect your cells. And so when you really start to unpack the fact that I got this disease,
exactly.
Not a big reach that it happened, but at the time it felt so random, and it also felt so punishing.
Yeah.
Right? I was really submitting to that, like things
Yeah.
happen for a reason, and
Yeah.
things. And so why, so why now? Why, when I just get barely on my feet, would this happen now? Um, and understanding, I wish that I had understood, and I wish I'd had somebody at that time to
Right.
say,
Yeah.
this is going to be part of the journey, but this isn't how your story ends. This
Right.
isn't the last chapter for you.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Oh,
you're going to deal with you're going to deal with this. You're going to deal with this as part of your human experience. And
right. Yeah.
you know,
There's more to life. There's more to it. Pardon me. So this was a perfect segue, actually, to my next question. Um, for those who, and we just touched on it briefly before, but for those who really are stuck in the muck and are really feeling like, because this gray zone that so many people live in of that, they keep getting hit, more punches coming in, more, right? And it's a very difficult place to be. It's a very difficult place to get motivated to even believe that there's another side or that there's more to their story. So for those people who are really stuck in that muck, how do you sort of coach them, convince them, encourage them out of that place?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because at the beginning of a post-traumatic growth journey, we actually have to get you ready for it. You
Right.
have to be prepared for your journey, right?
Yes.
You're gonna walk this path, but like, if I don't pack your backpack right, it's gonna go badly.
Mhm.
You got to have what you need, and so that's the self-care and resilience part.
Mhm.
And I separate very clearly self-care and resilience.
Yeah.
Okay, healing is an endurance sport. I
Mhm.
think I think folks with chronic disease know this, right?
Yes.
Healing is an endurance sport, and it is healing. It is an ing. There is no ed in my world. I don't believe in that.
Mhm.
You are constantly going to be doing this.
Mhm.
And what happens is, if you think about yourself as an athlete. And I know, but look, I've met some really, really ferocious people, but there are few more ferocious internal people than folks who have chronic disease and pain,
Okay.
because, man, you are facing all the time,
Yes.
something most people would not be able to tolerate. Like, you are superhuman people.
Yes.
And so your daily routine as an elite athlete
Yeah. Yes.
who's living in this pain space, your
Yeah.
daily routine needs to be some kind of self-care.
Right.
It needs to be some little thing. And I have things that you can look on my website. You can follow me, where I have a thing, community help me curate, self-care under $5 and under 5 minutes, because it's a daily thing.
Yeah.
And we've also screwed this up from a society standpoint, where we've convinced people that self-care is like, I work for 42 days and then I take the 43rd day off and I spend $400 at a spa.
Yes.
I feel like garbage at the end, and I'm broke and I don't understand, because that was supposed to be health self-care. It's not. Self-care is maintenance. If you were an athlete, you would not skip your training for 42 days and then do it on day 43 and expect that to work.
Yeah.
So self-care is maintenance.
Yeah.
Resilience is different.
Mhm.
Resilience is what you do when you've taken that hit.
Mhm.
When you had that bad day, when you're feeling triggered, when the pain is extra, when you've encountered something that has set you back.
Yeah.
Resilience is a timeout.
Mhm.
And we really work in my work on building resilience when we are in a good place, because
Right.
I think the other mistake we're making with resilience, we're making a few mistakes. One is, resilience is a skill, not a trait.
Mhm.
So you are not born not resilient. That is not a thing.
Yeah.
But we're really big on telling people that it is.
Yeah.
This is a skill set. You can learn this skill set, but the time to learn the skill set is not when you need it. It's when you don't, right? It's like anything else. So we want to stay with our athletic analogy, right? I don't learn how to do the proper flip turn as a competitive swimmer
Yeah.
in the race. That
Yeah.
is not the time to have that conversation, right? I learn it beforehand so I can do it in the race. I teach resilience as a bubble, and I teach people how to build what I call a resilience ring.
Oh, okay.
It's actually a visual tool, because what we know about trauma brains, what we know about pain brains, right, is that other pieces of our brain have to be, they depress
Mhm.
as a result of of that neurobiology that's that lit up space. And we want to be able to stop that lighting up quite so brightly.
Yes.
And get ourselves into that critical thinking space. But that is a really hard process to get to.
Right.
And it's, in many ways, it's the kindest and yet most unfair thing people say to folks who are in chronic pain or suffering through a trauma or something, is they go, well, what can I do to help you?
Yeah.
Well, your brain doesn't know the answer to that question.
No.
And so if you feel yourself suddenly put on the spot and you feel blank about that, and sort of as if you are demonstrating a lack of gratitude or you can't help yourself, please know that is a normal brain response.
Exactly.
Brains aren't built like that.
Yeah.
So I help people by actually creating that ring of resilience and then identifying within themselves when they need it. Because a resilience response really is that timeout. It says, it's not the little maintenance thing we're going to do every day. It says, I've got to take a timeout here to engage in some meaningful resilience to help me build myself back up, so I can keep moving on my journey. Yes. It's a pause. Resilience is a pause. And we see this in communities. You see people say it's such a resilient community, and you see them, rebuilding after a natural disaster or coming together after, a terrible shooting or something. That act, that's not the resilient act. Mm-hmm. The resilient act is what happened when those people came together for the vigil.
Right.
It's when they cried together. It's when they it's when they did the care that they needed. Mm-hmm. And so we think about resilience as, I got up, I did the thing, I finished the task, I faced this moment, I did this difficult thing. No, the resilience is what got you to be able to do that space.
Right.
And so I'm trying to teach skills. I teach people skills in those resilient spaces so that you can have that conversation. You are completely capable and brilliant and amazing people who can solve all of your problems. Mm-hmm. But somebody has to set you up to be able to do that.
Yes, in the right space. Absolutely.
Yep. And that's resilience training. So that's what I do.
Amazing. And I feel like that resilience piece is so important because it's kind of the antidote to our typical, like it's a skill. We have to learn how to do that. But our typical response, and if you live with chronic pain, is behavioral, and it's something that the brain adapts to. And so if we can teach you that skill set so that in that moment it becomes not reactionary, but like something that we rely on right off the bat. Right off the bat.
I mean, it can become ritual.
Ritual.
But ritual is a great way to say that. Yeah. And resilience has been researched. There are 7 types of resilience. And a lot of them, we kind of subscribed, I think, as a society to, to the adversity resilience, to the tough resilience. And I also think people immediately equate resilience with being tough.
Yeah. Yes.
Resilience means I pushed through my pain.
Yes.
Resilience means I resisted the urge to indulge in these feelings that I was having. It doesn't.
Right.
Resilience means I sit next to that moment.
Yes. Oh, I love it.
I get close to it. Yeah. I identify it, and I find ways that I need to process it. And that really becomes nuanced based on what you need and how your body responds. I talk about trauma types. My personal primary trauma response is freeze. Mm-hmm. There's, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn are now the 4 recognized trauma responses. My primary trauma response is freeze. Right. And so, which means, it accompanies a variety of things I will often forget. Mm-hmm. There's some things that go along with that, but I'm aware of what going into a freeze response now looks like because I've spent time. And one of the physical somatic things that you can do for freeze people is pressure. But I'm claustrophobic. Mm-hmm. So the simple, reaction to somebody who doesn't know me, he'd be like, oh, well, freeze, you should, so surely you have like a weighted blanket or any of that. I cannot have that because I am claustrophobic. Right. So I had to learn through my own resilience training on my own resilience ring. I have a really interesting response tool for my freeze, which is the batting cage.
Oh, okay.
Because there's this impact
Mm-hmm.
that happens when I swing a bat and the bat meets the ball,
Mm-hmm.
that impact goes through my body,
Mm-hmm.
and it helps me release that freeze.
Ah, I love it.
And then I can think again.
It's the
Right?
bypass. I love it.
Right.
Yeah.
I can think again about what I need to do.
Right.
I also have on my ring, depending on what's happening for myself, I have painting. I'm a hobbyist watercolorist,
Mm-hmm.
and I have painting on my ring.
Mm-hmm.
I have it in my self-care space and in my resilience space. In my self-care space, I can learn and be taught and be pushed
Mm-hmm.
through that painting. In my resilience space, I cannot, which means when I need resilience, I don't watch a video tutorial on learning a new skill.
Right.
It will not stick. It's not a thing. It will
Yeah.
send me deeper into feeling badly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's a very how is resilience holding yourself up in a room for an evening and putting a paintbrush on paper,
Mm-hmm.
or, going to the batting cage? I have a space. We use space as well. One of my spaces is my car. I like to be in my car.
Mm-hmm.
I like to be alone in my car. That space works for me. These aren't tough, facing the world, having conversation responses.
Yeah.
And yet they are the tools
Yeah.
that give me the skill set and the wherewithal to do that next part, to speak up,
Right.
to respond,
Yes. Yes.
to
Yes.
heal,
Yes.
to,
Oh, beautiful.
to advocate to your doctor if that's what you have to do. Those are really
Yeah.
difficult conversations when you're having pain. Those are difficult conversations. If you've got to talk to your mental health therapist sometimes, those are, am I ready to have this conversation? We engage in resilience, which isn't a fight.
Right.
It's connecting to ourselves to sit next to what's hurting.
Yeah.
So that then we
Yeah.
can engage on that journey.
Oh, some good nuggets there. Okay, chicken nuggets. No, I'm just kidding. They're not chicken nuggets.
Okay. All the McNuggets.
Yeah.
Well, we need the McNuggets. We just need them
do.
to be healthy, and we need them, because that is, our brain will hold on to them.
Yeah.
And we just need to know that we have to look critically at those and how they work for us.
Yes. Perfect segue. Oh, you read my mind. Yeah, the power and the skill of being able to observe is so powerful. And I think you just keep coming back to that. It is a skill. So it definitely takes practice. But, observation around, why am I feeling this way? Or how am I feeling sitting next to this pain? Or how am I feeling sitting through these thoughts or this emotion that I'm feeling right now? And also, you also brought up a beautiful point around how that resiliency is just kind of creates that space, right? That space to be able to, safe space, positive space. And when I say positive, I don't mean I'm, Pollyannish, but it is a healthy space to be able to take a pause, to take that time out, like you said, to be able to observe and then make an informed decision on what to do next, as opposed to we've become so reactive, especially when you live with pain or illness or trauma.
Yeah. And, that reaction, oh my gosh, we are so just taught, we have to react.
Yeah.
React. And, pain is not a fun place to be, whether that pain is traumatic and mental pain or physical pain or a combination thereof, which, I think there's also an abundant amount of research to say that you're doing the summit with the overlap for very clear intentional reasons. And that is because the two are, twin sisters, if nothing else. They very much work together.
Yep.
And we have to be able to, it is a practice though of being able to say what is happening and how can I identify it. Very, very clear. I still work on this.
Of course.
And I still frequently don't get it right.
Yeah. Yeah.
For myself, I'm very good. And I'm very good at doing this for other people. And that is the piece I would love to say to your listeners is, think about this for 1 second. When you were struggling and you are playing the tape in your head about how you're struggling again and you're behind again and you're late again and you didn't get the things then you wanted to do again. If it were anybody else in the world, would you talk to them
right
the way you're talking inside your head to yourself?
Yeah, exactly.
I would be shocked if you were. And I have this wonderful yoga teacher. I took up hot yoga a couple of years ago now, which sounds completely strange and unusual. And I agree that all of that it is, especially for me, as I've revealed, I'm claustrophobic. Like, why would you go into a hot room? But I had tried regular yoga and I couldn't do it. It wasn't, I wasn't in a headspace where I could do that. I was not engaging, making grocery lists and, hurting myself. Right. Because I couldn't be in the space, and in the hot yoga room, that was not an option. And I've become a little bit of an addict to this, and I frequently go. Incidentally, I have no research on it, but the friend who got me involved suffered an extremely painful chronic disease, a blood disease. And he actually did the hot yoga and said it saved his life. That reprogramming inside the body. But I have this beautiful teacher who frequently will say, if you're not saying something kind in your head, what they call ahimsa, would you ever say that to somebody else?
That's right.
Would you ever utter those words out loud to another person? Let alone somebody you love.
Right.
You are supposed to love yourself, and that's a long, long journey for most of us.
Yeah.
But would you say this to someone you love? Because you probably wouldn't.
Right. There's so much space required. Sorry.
Yeah.
Let me rephrase that. It's really a tough skill, but it is hugely impactful, that whole kindness to yourself. I mean, my daughter hates the word self-compassion. It kind of makes me giggle. Yes. And I know a lot of people maybe not resonate with it, but really it's just creating a safe, healthy space, right? And so I think if we think of it that way, then it softens it a little bit. But
and I think Dr. Kristen Neff wrote a beautiful book. Is it Fierce Self-Compassion? Is that what that book's called? Yes. And I remember it's not that old, and you do go through your journey. And I remember that book coming out, and again, I have to be intentional about the way I talk to myself. I saw that book and I saw that title, and I was like, no, not doing that. Right. Like my initial response was very sarcastic a little bit towards it. And like, oh,
that's normal.
Right. Also, if she had written a book, or anybody had written a book, and I saw it and it said compassion for the world.
Yes.
Passion for, if it had said anything other than self-compassion, if it had been fierce environmental compassion, fierce compassion, I would have been like, oh yes, please.
Yes.
But because the word self was in there,
right,
I immediately did this jaded, like, no, I'm not having any of that.
Right.
And it is an enculturation thing. I would go, that's ridiculous that you would do that, because I can't help anybody else. My whole process is to be helpful to people. It's what I want to do in the world. And regardless of whether or not you've made this your profession or anything else, there are people in your world, even if, or animals in your world, you want to help and be part of that. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. And so, what the airlines say, right? If you don't put your oxygen mask on first,
right.
You're not going to be able to do this. And it is the most uncomfortable of things. Still to this day for me. That part is the most uncomfortable thing. But I have learned over time a couple of things. One is that we've often been taught, as trauma survivors, as chronic pain folks, we have been taught to diminish ourselves.
Oh, yes.
So the degree to which that thought process that you may have, I may have, your listeners may have, is actually an authentic thought process to ourselves, versus something that has been ingrained in our brains and in our neural pathways for a lifetime, is probably highly questionable, right? There's probably a lot of good examples throughout most of our lives where we were taught to set aside our own needs, our own feelings, our own wants, to the point where that voice got so tiny we could not even hear it anymore.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And when you engage in self-compassion, when you engage in these resilience skills, when you engage in this post-traumatic growth, you start to give that voice a little bit more space to just learn to speak to you
Right.
a little louder. And that's, that's how you get better.
Yeah.
At the beginning of practicing resilience, it will feel so weird.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It just is such an uncomfortable, like,
yeah,
I'm going to stop my life. Like, we're going to have cereal for dinner because my nerve pain is so bad tonight that I need to stop and sit and do this space, take the space in my car.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to punish myself for doing that, because I know that in the long term, I'm actually going to see growth from it.
Right.
None of that is going to feel congruent.
No, it's true. Yeah.
At the beginning, it just isn't.
Yeah.
But if you take the risk, and I think for folks who, if you've come to the summit, if you've started to engage with people like us, what you know is that what you're doing right now isn't working.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. That is the tipping point, right? Or at least a little nudge.
Right. What you're doing right now, it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't moving you anywhere.
Right.
And so taking a different path,
no
matter how awkward, no matter how unusual, especially if you can take it in concert with folks like you who are running great societies, and to know you're not alone while you're doing it.
Right.
You can be part of a community and take that kind of road less traveled to get to this space where you can, of course, you're still going to have bad days.
Right.
Chronic pain because it's chronic.
Yep.
Trauma is trauma because it's a, long lasting event that's going to come back.
That's right.
It's not that you're not going to have those bad days. But get so many good ones, great ones, brilliant ones.
Yes.
Portions of brilliant ones.
That's right. Yeah, it's true.
I remember the moment I was like, I think I'm getting better. It's like I was in my kitchen late at night, unloading a dishwasher. And I was listening to music, and I suddenly caught the fact that I was like dancing a little bit.
Yeah. Those little things. Those are always most impactful.
To the music. And I was like, the freedom.
Yeah.
For me in my position and in the experience I'd had, the freedom to feel like I could move instinctively, freely within my body. Yeah. It had been gone for me for so long. Yeah. That it was this little teeny tiny moment. Yeah. But it was utterly joyful. Yeah. It was utterly joyful. And the thing is if you can notice those hard moments, those moments you're going to sit next to your pain, you're going to sit. Yeah. You also learn.
So yes, we always need the yin and the yang, right? Yeah.
Those other beautiful moments, and suddenly they're everywhere.
That's right.
How lovely. I'm fortunate to be in a part of the country right now where the weather is gorgeous, which is not shared, I know, by most of the rest of the country, for which I feel great compassion. But at night, the sun is starting to go down a little bit and the air gets a little fresh and things start to bloom. And I'm just in my car with the windows rolled down, and it was doing something very mundane. I was coming back eating, but there's that moment where I'm like, oh, I just love the smell of that fresh.
Right. Oh yeah.
I was missing all of that before. I spent years sort of ignoring all of that because I was too busy in that space I call survivorship.
Oh yeah. Well, yes. That's your body. Yeah, your body is so good at that response, right? It gets good at that response. And so if we can help it get good at the little recognitions, then beautiful. And that's the work you're doing, which is fantastic.
And that's my thriving. That's my version of thriving. Was like notice, smelling the night air, knowing that was going to help empower me a little bit. Actually, it helps power me through. It's making something fun. It's dancing in your kitchen while you're putting your dishwasher. I'm
glad you said that, because that was my mom's thing. We called it kitchen dancing, and I know that was her stress release. And to me, she passed many years ago. That is a special memory place. I do it now. I encourage my kids to do it. So anyway, I could talk to you for days.
So great.
So many good chicken McNuggets today. Thank you so much. Before we go, though, and I'm sorry to cut this off because I'm just trying to be mindful of everyone's time, but you did slightly mention your freebie. Can you just remind me again what it is for our listeners?
Sure. So I have a free download. It is called 20 Things Not to Say, 12 to Say and Said, and
Good.
Why. And
Okay.
so this is great for other people, but it's also great for you. I want you to look
Sure.
at what you are saying to yourself. What is your own headspace saying to you? Because you'll be surprised how many of those things on there you've been saying to yourself.
Yeah.
And so there's this suggestion of 12 things to try instead.
Perfect.
To practice with each other and also for ourselves.
Lovely. And for people to get a hold of you, where can they get a hold of you?
So you can find me at Myles to Go, and it's MYLES. So I'm Myles with a Y to go.net.
Mm-hmm.
You can find me on Facebook at Speaks Myles, and you can find me on Instagram at Myles.2 and go. So I'm happy to connect with you in all of those ways. You can get on my email list, you can DM me, and I'd love to spend some time with folks.
Fantastic. I will definitely leave all those links for our listeners, but I want to say a very big thank you for being here today and for jumping on board with us. A great message.
It's been a pleasure. I'm so glad. And I'm just so excited for everybody to be able to listen to this whole summit. What a great project. I'm so happy to be part of it. Thank you for including me.
Thank you. No, thank you so much.